Chicago in 1929 wasn't a city. It was a festering wound pretending to be alive. The L train screamed overhead like banshees on meth. The stockyards puked out the stench of fresh slaughter into the freezing wind, and every other doorway hid a speakeasy behind a butcher's counter or a tailor's dummy. You pushed through a back room, flashed the right password, and suddenly you were drowning in a legal hooch while a jazz band tried to pretend the world wasn't ending. Prohibition began in 1920 as a grand moral experiment gone wrong. A coalition of Bible-thumping Protestants, outraged wives sick of black eyes and empty wallets, suffragettes who saw every saloon as a den of corruption, and factory bosses desperate for workers who didn't show up hungover or missing fingers. They all screamed that alcohol was the root of every evil. Wife beating, child neglect, political graft, industrial accidents, you name it. Ban the booze, they said, and society would heal itself. The 18th Amendment was passed, the Volstead Act was enforced, and America went dry. Except nobody stopped drinking. The law said no liquor, but the public said fuck that, and kept pouring. Demand didn't die, it went feral. Overnight, a bottle of Canadian whiskey became worth more than a man's house. Corner drunks turned into bootlegging kingpins, trucking empires sprang up hauling hijacked shipments across state lines, and the cash flowed thicker than the blood in the gutters. The underground didn't just survive, it grew fangs, claws, and a boardroom ruthlessness that made legitimate business look like child's play. The city reeked of it, blood mixed with cheap gin, cigar smoke, and the sweet rot of opportunity. In Chicago, the law didn't prohibit drinking, it just auctioned off the monopoly to the meanest sons of bitches willing to kill for it. And nobody played that game better than the men who ruled the South Side and the North Side, two empires circling each other like wolves over the same carcass. Picture two wolves circling the same rotting carcass in a city that already smelled like death. Alphonse Gabriel Capone on the South Side and George Clarence Bugs Moran on the North. Capone was the showman. Broad-shouldered, pockmarked face scarred from a barroom knife fight he never talked about, always in tailored suits that scream money even when the blood underneath was still wet. He played the philanthropist for the press. Soup kitchens for the hungry, toys for kids at Christmas, fat envelopes slipped to cops and politicians with a wink. The public ate it up. Scarface Al, they called him, half admiring, half terrified. Behind the smile, though, he was a machine, ordering beatings that left men crawling on shattered knees, car bombs that painted sidewalks red, hijackings where truck drivers got their throats slit ear to ear and left freezing in ditches. The clap was eating his brain by then, but his hunger for power never dulled. Moran was the opposite, hot-blooded Irish Catholic with a fuse so short they nicknamed him Bugs for the crazy in his eyes. He still went to Mass on Sundays, crossed himself before a hit, but he'd drop a man without a second thought if the territory called for it. Fiercely proud, territorial as hell, and he despised Capone with a venom that went bone deep. It wasn't just business, it was personal. The bad blood didn't start with them. It simmered from the days when Dean O'Banion's Irish Northsiders and Johnny Torrio's Italian outfit first carved up Chicago like a Thanksgiving turkey. When O'Banion got his head blown off in his flower shop in 24, Moran stepped up, swearing vengeance. Capone, rising fast under Torrio, inherited the South Side Empire and the Grudge. What followed was years of tit-for-tat savagery. Drive-by shootings that turned streets into shooting galleries, warehouses torched to ash, trucks hijacked at gunpoint, bodies dumped in the river, or the stockyards where the hogs would finish the job. But the real poison came from the differences. Moran wouldn't touch prostitution. His Catholic upbringing made him draw the line there, even if it cost him millions. Capone? He ran the biggest whorehouses on the South Side, raking in cash, while Moran called him a pimp and a degenerate. Moran interfered with Capone's dog racing tracks and bootlegging routes. Capone's boys muscled in on Moran's speakeasies. Assassination attempts piled up like unpaid tabs. Moran's crew tried to bomb Capone's car, put a $50,000 bounty on his head, even took shots at Jack, Machine Gun McGurn, Capone's top enforcer. Capone answered in kind. Bodies dropped on both sides. Funerals became battlegrounds. By early 1929, the war had gone beyond territory. It was blood answering blood, payback the only language left. Every hijacked truck, every torched speakeasy, every dead lieutenant ratcheted the tension higher. Payback wasn't abstract anymore. It was personal, burning, inevitable. And in Chicago, when two kings want the same crown, only one walks away. The garage on North Clark Street was about to become the altar where that hatred finally spilled over in rivers. It started with a whisper on the wire, simple, sweet, and lethal as a poison kiss. Sometime in the days before Valentine's, one of Moran's boys got the call. A fat load of Canadian whiskey, hijacked or fenced cheap out of Detroit, was ready to move. Prime stuff, aged rye, not the bathtub swill that burned your throat and blinded you. The price was right, the timing perfect. All they had to do was show at the SMC Cartage Garage on North Clark Street around 10:30 a.m. on the 14th, load the trucks, and roll out before anyone got wise. Easy money in a city where easy money usually came soaked in blood. The garage itself was nothing special. A brick box tucked in Lincoln Park, smelling of motor oil, stale cigarettes, and the faint metallic tang of the nearby stockyards. Moran's outfit used it as a front, truck repairs by day, bootleg storage, and staging by night. On that freezing Thursday morning, 7 men drifted in like it was just another shift. They lounged around a couple of idling trucks, collars turned up against the cold seeping through the walls. Cigarettes glowed in the dim light filtering through grimy windows. Jokes cracked low and dirty. Someone probably bitched about the holiday, another day stuck working while the rest of the city played at romance. They had no idea the whole thing was a setup, engineered down to the last detail. The shipment never existed. It was bait dangled by someone inside or close enough to know Moran's routines, his greed, his trust in a good deal. Capone's crew, or whoever pulled the strings, knew these guys would bite. Hijack rumors were currency in Chicago. You didn't turn down a score like that without asking questions. And questions got you killed anyway. Just after 10:30, the side door creaked open. 2 men in crisp police uniforms stepped through first, blue wool, brass buttons, badges catching the weak light like they meant business. Behind them, 2 more in plain clothes, coats open just enough to show the hardware underneath. The 7 inside froze mid-sentence, hands drifting away from pockets. No panic, though. Cops were part of the game, half on the take, half shaking down whoever had the cash. This was probably just another raid, another envelope to slide across the table. Everybody line up against the wall, one of the officers barked, voice flat and practiced. Hands where we can see 'em. Nice and slow. They complied. Why wouldn't they? These weren't strangers storming in guns blazing. They were authority figures, and in their world, authority could be bought. Coats came open. Pistols slid across the oily floor. The men turned, faced the cold brick, hands raised. A couple even smirked, thinking they'd talk their way out, grease the palms, get back to loading whiskey by noon. The pause stretched, thick, electric, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Then the uniforms stepped back. Coats parted. Thompsons came up, drum magazines fat and black, barrels gleaming like promises. No warning, no speeches, just the metallic click of safeties flicking off. The garage exploded into hell. The side door banged open like a coffin lid slamming shut. 2 men in Chicago PD blue stepped in first, uniforms crisp, badges flashing dull in the weak garage light, peaked caps pulled low. Behind them, 2 more figures in overcoats and fedoras, hands already drifting toward hidden hardware. No sirens, no backup, just quiet authority that smelled wrong from the jump. The 7 inside didn't flinch hard. In Chicago 1929, cops showing up unannounced was Tuesday. Half the force was on someone's payroll anyway. Moran's or Capone's didn't matter. You paid the tax, you kept working. So they raised their hands slow, smirks flickering. Easy officers, one muttered. We can talk this out. Face the wall, hands high. No funny business, the lead uniform barked, voice flat as a gravestone. They moved like they'd rehearsed it 100 times, professional, calm, predatory. The men complied. Coats opened. Pistols slid across the oil-slick concrete with metallic scrapes. They turned, palms flat against the cold brick, shoulders squared like they were waiting for a frisk or a shakedown. Someone chuckled low, probably thinking a few $100 would grease the wheels and get them back to loading that phantom whiskey haul by lunch. They never saw the shift. The 2 in uniform stepped back, slow and deliberate. Coats parted on the plainclothes pair. Thompson's came up, fat drum magazines bulging like tumors, barrels short and brutal. One was the classic 50 round drum, the other fed from a box or another drum. .45 caliber Chicago typewriters, oiled and hungry. A heartbeat of silence. Copper on the tongue. Then the world ended. The first burst ripped like canvas tearing. 70 rounds in seconds, methodical sweeps at head, chest, gut levels, 3 passes to make sure nothing twitched. The Thompsons didn't bark, they howled, muzzle flashes strobing the dim garage into nightmare daylight. Slugs punched through wool, flesh, bone like it was nothing. Exit wounds blew out the size of fists, spraying blood, lung tissue, and bits of spine across the floor in wet arcs. Men jerked upright, then folded like broken marionettes, knees buckling, bodies sliding down the bricks in slow-motion ruin. One victim voided his bowels in the instant of terror, the stink mixing with cordite, hot brass, and the iron reek of fresh slaughter. A shotgun roared once, final insurance, probably a sawed-off 12-gauge, finishing anyone still breathing. Plaster dust choked the air. Shell casings pinged and rolled. The roar died to ringing ears and the wet gurgle of dying men. The killers didn't linger. No speeches. No gloating. They backed out the way they came, uniforms still impeccable, Thompsons tucked under coats like they were heading to a parade. Outside, a black Cadillac touring car idled, stolen plates, probably already burning rubber toward the nearest alley. Inside, 7 bodies slumped in a ragged line, coats black with blood, shoes still pointed obediently at the wall, like schoolboys caught smoking. The garage reeked of massacre, gun smoke, shit, piss, and the copper penny smell of opened arteries. And somewhere the man who'd ordered it, insulated by layers of cutouts out-of-town torpedoes and plausible deniability, was probably sipping coffee in Florida, hands clean as a priest's. The silence after the guns fell quiet was thicker than the blood pooling on the concrete. 7 men lay in a broken heap against the brick wall, coats sodden black, limbs twisted at wrong angles, faces half gone or staring blankly at nothing. Cigarette, but still smoldered between dead fingers. One dog's frantic barking echoed from somewhere outside. Highball, John May's German Shepherd, gone feral from the smell of death. These weren't choir boys. They were Moran's hard cases, the muscle and money men who kept the North Side greased and running. Here's who the Thompsons turned into meat that morning. Peter Goosey Gussenberg, the older brother, was the veteran enforcer, 40 years old, built like a brick shithouse, with a rap sheet that started in 1906 when he pulled 3 years at Joliet for burglary. Parole violations, more jail time, then the big one. 3 years in Leavenworth for the 1923 Dearborn Station mail robbery, alongside Big Tim Murphy. He was Moran's frontline triggerman, cold, reliable, the kind of guy who'd walk into a rival's joint and leave bodies without breaking a sweat. He'd put lead in Capone allies like Jack McGurn and Tony Lombardo. That morning, he took about a dozen slugs, face half obliterated, body identified by his brother Henry. Frank Gussenberg, Peter's younger sibling, 36, shorter and meaner, black hair, brown eyes, always playing the salesman front while racking up disorderly conduct, robbery suspicions, and burglary charges since 1909. Married 2 women at once, Lucille and Ruth, neither knowing about the other. He survived the initial hail long enough to crawl 20 feet through his own guts, 14 bullets in him. 7 recovered. When the Rayall cops asked who did it, he rasped the old code, "Nobody shot me." Died hours later in the hospital, loyal to the end. Albert Kachelek, better known as James Jimmy Clark, was Moran's second-in-command, brother-in-law, and right-hand enforcer. Lived under aliases to stay 1 step ahead of the heat. Sharp, connected, the guy who made sure orders got followed and problems disappeared. He went down fast, no chance to reach for anything. Adam Heyer, aliases Hayes Snyder, was the brains, the bookkeeper and business manager who kept the ledgers clean, the cash flowing through front companies, and the dirty money looking legitimate on paper. Without him, the operation would have collapsed under its own weight. He handled the numbers so Moran could focus on the muscle. Albert R. Weinschenker ran Moran's legitimate fronts, cleaning and dyeing shops like Central Cleaners and Dyers, plus the Alcazar Club. Dressed sharp, always in a suit, looked enough like Moran from a distance that some say the lookouts mistook him for the boss and pulled the trigger early. He was the polished face of a racket until the bullets made him unrecognizable. John May, the mechanic, was the lowest on the totem pole, $1.50 a week, keeping Moran's trucks running smooth. Former safecracker with a spotty record, robbery charges in 1913, not indicted, larceny dropped in 1917. Married, carried a St. Christopher medal that caught a slug and mangled. He brought his dog Highball that day. The animal survived, but the cops put it down later when it wouldn't stop snarling at anyone near the bodies. May had only $18 in his pocket when they turned him over, small change for a man who fixed getaway cars. Then there was Reinhard H. Schwimmer, the odd man out. Former optometrist who ditched his practice for the thrill of gambling and hanging around tough guys. Not a full member, just a civilian thrill-seeker who liked the action, the horse bets, the stories. He was there for the excitement, probably nursing a hangover or chasing a tip. The gang tolerated him. He didn't pull triggers, but he got lined up anyway. One of the few hit with shotgun pellets in the mop-up. They were hard men in a hard game. Enforcers, accountants, mechanics, hangers-on, all part of the machine that kept Moran's empire humming. In the end, they died the same way they lived, facing a wall, hands up, thinking the worst was just another shakedown. The garage floor drank their blood like it was thirsty. And outside, the city kept moving, indifferent. Bugs Moran was supposed to be dead by 10:35 a.m. He was the real prize, the hot-headed Irish bastard who'd been thumbing his nose at Capone for years, the one whose head the Thompsons were meant to turn into red mist. The whole setup, the fake whiskey hall, the garage rendezvous, the phony cops, was built around luring him in with his crew. Moran ran the north side, kill him, and the empire crumbles. But fate, or maybe just a stubborn cold, had other plans. That morning, Moran was feeling like shit. A bad flu had him coughing, congested, maybe still groggy from whatever kept him up late. Or maybe it was instinct, paranoia honed from too many close calls, too many friends turned into headlines. Either way, he was running late. He and two trusted lieutenants, Willie Marks and Ted Newberry, walked the last block to the SMC cartage garage instead of rolling up in a car. Caution? Hangover? Who knows? But it saved his ass. As they turned the corner onto North Clark, Moran spotted it, a black Cadillac touring car idling curbside, the kind the department used for raids. Two guys in police blue stepped out, badges catching the pale winter light, followed by a couple in plain clothes. No sirens, no uniforms swarming, just quiet, professional menace. Moran's got twisted. In his world, a cop car at your front door meant payoff time or trouble. He froze. "Hold up," he muttered. They ducked back, using parked cars and the morning fog for cover, watching from a block away, like wary wolves. Inside, the trap snapped shut. The cops barked orders. Hands went up. Thompsons came out. The roar started, 70 rounds tearing through flesh and brick. Moran heard it. The muffled thunder of machine guns echoing down the street, the sharp pops of a shotgun finishing the job. Screams cut short, glass shattering, then silence. He didn't rush in. Didn't play hero. He knew what that sound meant. Execution, not arrest. Marks and Newberry exchanged looks with him, faces pale. They turned and walked, fast, melting into the side streets before any real cops showed up or the killers spilled out looking for stragglers. Minutes. That's all it took. A few extra minutes of sickness, suspicion, or sheer dumb luck. If Moran had been on time, if he'd strolled in with the crew, chin up, ready to inspect the shipment, he'd have been eighth against the wall, brains on the bricks beside his brother-in-law and enforcers. Instead, he lived. Slipped away, hard hammering, already knowing who pulled the strings. The war wasn't over, but the balance had tipped hard. Capone's outfit had drawn first blood in spectacular fashion, and Moran, the man they came to kill, was still breathing. In Chicago, survival wasn't about being the toughest. It was about being late. The garage door hung open like a wound that wouldn't close. Real cops swarmed in minutes later, sirens finally wailing, flashbulbs popping, reporters elbowing through the crowd like vultures. They found the 7 bodies cooling in their own blood, the floor a slick red lake, shell casings scattered like brass confetti. Highball the dog was still barking hysterically outside, refusing to let anyone near until they dragged him off and put him down. The photos hit the wires fast, grainy black and white shots of slumped suits, brains on brick, blood sprayed high enough to paint the wall. Newspapers across the country splashed them on front pages the next day, screaming headlines that turned stomach contents nationwide. This wasn't some backroom knifing or drunken drive-by. It was military execution, cold, calculated, in broad daylight on a holiday about love and flowers. America had been chuckling at bootleggers as colorful outlaws, Robin Hoods with Tommy guns and sharp suits. Now the mask ripped off. The public gagged. Outrage boiled over. Letters to editors demanding action, politicians thundering about lawlessness, even the dry crowd admitting Prohibition had birthed a hydra of monsters. The massacre didn't just kill 7 men, it murdered the romantic myth of the gangster. What was left was the ugly truth. Ban something people crave, and the most vicious fuckers will sell it at any price. But justice, that stayed on vacation. No one was ever convicted. Not a single arrest stuck. Ballistics tied the Thompsons to known gang hardware. Witnesses fingered out-of-town torpedoes like Fred Killer Burke, Gus Winkler, Fred Getz, imported talent from St. Louis and Detroit to keep Capone's hands clean. Jack McGurn, Capone's favorite machine gunner, got hauled in briefly, but his girlfriend swore he was with her all day. Alibis held like concrete. The outfit's insulation was perfect. Orders whispered through cutouts, killers paid in cash and silence, evidence vanishing faster than witnesses. The finger pointed straight at Capone. Everyone knew it. Cops knew it. The press screamed it. The public believed it. But proof? Thin as a razor. Capone was lounging in Florida at the time. Palm Island mansion, sun, booze, broads, conveniently sick with bronchopneumonia when the grand jury subpoena arrived. His doctor wrote a note. Too ill to travel, risk of collapse and death. Bullshit, but ironclad enough to keep him poolside while the bodies cooled back home. He even posed for photos, smiling that Scarface grin, playing the innocent philanthropist. Suspicion festered. Endless. Poisonous. Moran, still breathing, swore revenge but never quite pulled it off. His crew gutted, his empire cracking. Capone's outfit tightened its grip on Chicago for a while, but the heat was on. President Hoover, pissed off by the headlines, told his Treasury boys, get Capone. Not for murder, for taxes. Ledgers, payoffs, unreported income. The feds built a case brick by brick, accountant by accountant. In 1931, they nailed him on evasion. 11 years in the pen. Alcatraz. The man who survived machine guns and car bombs fell to arithmetic and paper trails. Brutal poetry. Bullets couldn't touch him. Numbers did. The massacre didn't end the mob. Didn't repeal Prohibition overnight. That came in '33. But it cracked the facade wide open. America stared at its own creation, the monster born from good intentions gone rotten, and finally admitted, when you outlaw vice, you don't kill it. You just hand the keys to the devils willing to defend their turf with lead. And in Chicago, the stains on that garage floor never really washed out. They just faded into legend. The photos hit like a gut punch. By the afternoon of February 14th, 1929, reporters had swarmed the garage on North Clark Street. Flashbulbs popped over the blood-soaked concrete, capturing the 7 bodies slumped in their suits, coats black with gore, faces mangled, limbs splayed like discarded rags. One image showed Frank Gusenberg's crawl marks trailing through his own pooling blood. Another framed the wall splattered high with exit wound spray. These weren't grainy crime scene snaps. They were raw, intimate horrors printed large and clear. The next morning, newspapers from New York to Los Angeles splashed them across front pages. Headlines screamed in bold black ink, "Massacre in broad daylight, Chicago's Valentine of death, 7 slain in garage horror." The Chicago Tribune called it the culmination of criminals using politicians and politicians using criminals. Papers nationwide ran the pictures unfiltered, bodies twisted, brains on brick, the dog highball's frantic barking implied in every frame. Middle America, sipping coffee in diners and reading over breakfast, stared at proof that the roaring 20s glamour had curdled into nightmare. Before that day, gangsters had a certain shine. Capone posed for cameras, fed the hungry, played the generous tough guy. Bootleggers were folk heroes to some, defying the dry law, supplying what the people craved, thumbing their noses at Washington prudes. Drive-bys and bombings were background noise, distant Chicago problems. People shrugged, chuckled even. That's just the way it is out there. Not anymore. The massacre crossed a line. This wasn't a shootout between rivals in some alley. It was a cold execution. Phony cops lined up victims, machine guns in a garage on a holiday about love and chocolate. The public didn't just gasp, they recoiled. Letters flooded editors demanding action. Politicians thundered in speeches. Even the dry crowd, the temperance diehards who'd pushed prohibition, started whispering that maybe banning booze hadn't healed society. It had armed monsters instead. The myth shattered overnight. The bootlegger as rogue hero died right there on that oily floor beside the 7 men. What replaced it was uglier. Recognition that prohibition hadn't eliminated vice. It had auctioned it to the most ruthless sons of bitches alive. Machine guns weren't regulating markets anymore, they were enforcing them. Bodies weren't collateral, they were receipts. Outrage rippled coast to coast. It didn't repeal the 18th Amendment on the spot. That took 4 more years, but it cracked the facade wide open. Americans finally admitted what they'd ignored. Hand vice to the devils, and they'll defend their empire with lead. The photos made it impossible to look away. The nation stared at its own rotting soul, and for once, it couldn't pretend it was just another Tuesday in Chicago. Al Capone survived machine guns, car bombs, drive-bys, and a city full of enemies who'd have paid good money to see him bleed out. He laughed off the St. Valentine's Day massacre suspicion. Hell, he was in Florida getting a tan while the garage floor drank his rival's blood. No murder rap ever stuck. No witness lived long enough to testify. The outfit's layers kept him insulated. Cutouts, imported killers, cash payoffs. Bullets bounced off him like rain on a fedora. But paper didn't miss. The massacre photos had scorched the nation. Public outrage hit fever pitch. Chicago looked like a war zone, and the bootlegger myth was dead. President Herbert Hoover, fed up with the headlines, leaned on his Treasury boys. Get Capone. Not for the bodies in the garage, for the money. The feds couldn't pin murder or prohibition violations tight enough, but everyone knew the outfit raked in millions, bootlegging, whorehouses, gambling, protection, and Capone never filed a damn tax return. Enter the accountants. Treasury agents like Frank Wilson and Elmer Irie dug through ledgers, wire transfers, phone records, casino winnings, even Capone's own boasts about his lifestyle. They traced unreported income, $1 million plus from 1925 to 1929 alone. Taxes owed around $215,000, a fortune then. Witnesses flipped, bookkeepers, bagmen, even a Miami hotel clerk detailing Capone's lavish spending on suits, parties, and a swimming pool. The evidence piled up like unpaid bills. Indictments dropped in 1931, 22 counts of tax evasion, plus conspiracy charges. Capone tried the old playbook, plead guilty in June for Sweetheart 2.5-year deal. The judge shut it down cold. I'm not bound by any bargain. Capone yanked the plea, went to trial. October 17, 1931, the jury nailed him on 5 counts, 3 felonies for evading taxes in 25 to 27, 2 misdemeanors for failing to file in 28 to 29. A week later, November 24th, Judge James Wilkerson slammed him with 11 years, the longest sentence ever handed for tax evasion, plus $50,000 fine, $7,692 core costs, and the back taxes with interest. The most feared man in America, the King of Chicago, brought low by arithmetic. No Thompsons, no blood, just numbers. He started in Atlanta's federal pen, but special treatment rumors, protection from inmates, cushy perks, got him shipped to the Rock, Alcatraz, in 1934. Prisoner 85. No more smiles for cameras. No more envelopes for cops. The syphilis he'd carried for years ate deeper into his brain. By the end, he was foggy, childlike, playing banjo in the cell block band to pass time. Stabbed once superficial, but the real killer was the disease. He served 7 years, 6 months, 15 days. Good behavior shaved the rest. Released November 16, 1939. He limped back to his Palm Island mansion in Florida, mind half gone, body failing. Family kept him quiet. No more empires. No more headlines. He died January 25, 1947, stroke and cardiac arrest, age 48. His brain so ravaged doctors said he had the mind of a 12-year-old. Brutal fucking poetry. The man who built a throne on corpses and whiskey couldn't be shot down. But the government found the one thing he couldn't buy or kill, his own greed on paper. Bullets failed. Paper won. Nearly a century later, the garage is gone, torn down in '67, now just a patch of grass behind a senior center on North Clark Street, but the echoes don't fade. You can still feel them if you stand there on a cold February morning. The phantom stink of cordite and blood, the ghost of highball barking at shadows, the faint metallic taste of copper in the air. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre wasn't just another gang hit. It was the moment America looked in the mirror and saw the monster Prohibition had birthed. A noble experiment meant to cure society's ills, booze-fueled beatings, corruption, moral decay. Instead auction vice to the meanest bastards with the biggest guns. Demand didn't die, it mutated. Out came the Thompsons, the hijackings, the bodies in ditches. And when 7 men got lined up and shredded in broad daylight on a day for hearts and flowers, the romantic bullshit ended. No more folk hero bootleggers. Just cold execution, machine gun receipts for market share. The outrage was seismic. Newspapers sold millions blasting those crime scene photos nationwide. Slumped suits in lakes of gore, brains on brick. It cracked the facade. Prohibition hadn't fixed anything. It had armed psychopaths and corrupted cops. Public sentiment flipped hard. Gangsters stopped being dashing rogues and became public enemies. Hoover's feds got the green light to hunt Capone, not for murder, but for the paper trail he couldn't bury. The massacre greased the skids for repeal in '33, and it helped birth the first real federal gun controls, the National Firearms Act of '34, aimed at those drum-fed Chicago typewriters that turned garages into abattoirs. It scarred Chicago forever. The city still carries the nickname, Al Capone's town, like a tattoo it can't laser off. Tourists snap pics at the site, ghost hunters claim screams, and gunshots linger in the ether. The bloodstains may have washed away, but the reputation didn't. And it resonates because the lesson never dies. Outlaw what millions crave, and you don't erase it. You hand the keys to organized predators who'll defend their monopoly with lead, fire, and layers of deniability. Modern echoes? Drug cartels warring over borders, black markets thriving under failed bans, cyber syndicates laundering billions. The same stupid policy, raw power, monstrous egos, and dumb fucking luck. 1 man late by minutes. 7 turned to meet. A nation forced to confront its own creation. History doesn't whisper about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It roars, deafening automatic fire ricocheting off brick walls, leaving stains that time and laws can't scrub clean. The Thompsons are silent now, but the echo? It never stops.